Welcome to my channel. Today I'm bringing you a real horror story that has left its mark on history. This tale of tragedy and intrigue has even inspired films such as The Chernobyl Diaries and The Day After. In the fall of 1987, scrapper Roberto dos Santos Alves decided he could no longer ignore the rumors circulating about a hidden treasure. This treasure was supposedly located in the crumbling building near his home in Goiânia, Brazil, a place that many would dismiss as another man's trash. On September 7th of that year, Alves and his friend Wagner Pereira ventured to the site with nothing more than simple tools. After some probing and prying, they uncovered what appeared to be a shiny metal capsule, no bigger than a thermos. Over the next few days, Alves carefully disassembled the capsule, revealing something that seemed even more valuable. During this time, he experienced vomiting and dizziness, which he attributed to something he had eaten. Alves transported all the pieces to Devair, the owner of a local scrapyard. Ferreira, intrigued by the shiny assembly, paid Alves and stored the pieces in his garage. That night, Ferreira noticed something unusual. The pieces were glowing a vibrant blue. 3 days later, Ferreira invited family and friends to view the mysterious blue glow. Ernesto Fabiano, one of Ferreira's employees, eventually cracked open the canister's thin glass window, spilling out what turned out to be grams of sparkling crystalline powder. The amount was less than what would fill a third of a soda can, yet it was highly intriguing. Fabiano used a large glowing crystal to craft a ring for his wife, describing the material as carnival glitter, and shared some of the powder with his brother, who drew a cross on his abdomen with the dust. Over the following week, pieces of the original assembly were distributed among various scrapyards, and the glowing blue powder was sprinkled across numerous homes and bodies throughout the city. Thus commenced one of the gravest nuclear disasters in history, the Goiânia Incident. Goiânia, the capital and the largest city of the Brazilian state of Goiás, is situated on the central Brazilian plateau, a region famed for its sprawling cereal farms and extensive cattle ranches. This city, seemingly ordinary in its agricultural and pastoral landscape, was about to face a calamity that would shake its very core. In a local cancer treatment facility within Goiânia, a radiotherapy machine had been installed, a device designed to focus intense beams of energy from highly radioactive source material directly onto tumors, aiming to destroy cancer cells. However, when the clinic eventually shut its doors years later, it left behind more than just medical equipment. The radiotherapy machine, now obsolete and abandoned, was left in place along with the derelict building. Most of the clinic was eventually demolished, leaving the site in a state of neglect. The heart of the radiotherapy machine, a highly radioactive source, became an orphan source, a term for a radioactive material that is no longer under proper regulatory control and is either lost, stolen, or otherwise unaccounted for. This situation, characterized by a dangerous lack of oversight, was a ticking time bomb for the city of Goiânia. The orphan source that Ernesto Fabiano would later disturb contained cesium, a byproduct of uranium decay. Specifically, cesium-137, one of the most problematic isotopes, was present. Cesium-137 is known for its high radioactivity, its long half-life, and its propensity to spread rapidly through the environment, largely due to its common chemical form as a water-soluble salt. The extensive contamination caused by cesium-137 in the aftermath of both the Chernobyl and Fukushima Daiichi nuclear disasters serves as a stark reminder of its hazardous potential. While less than a quarter of a pound of cesium salt might seem insignificant, small enough to be contained within a sandwich bag, the potent combination of nuclear materials and human curiosity turned this seemingly trivial amount into a significant threat. The powerful nature of cesium-137 and the social and inquisitive tendencies of humans made it far more dangerous than its physical volume might suggest. This resulted in the screening of more than 250,000 Brazilians in the fall of 1987, as the contamination spread through the city. Many of those screened found themselves returning to homes that were no longer safe or even intact. In biology, there is a phenomenon known as an evolutionary trap, where behaviors that once had adaptive value become detrimental in rapidly changing environments. For instance, sea turtles, which have evolved to navigate using the moon's light, now face life-threatening confusion due to artificial lighting on modern beaches. Similarly, Australian jewel beetles may mistakenly attempt to mate with discarded beer bottles that resemble potential mates. In a comparable fashion, the visually appealing nature of cesium-137 proved dangerously attractive, leading to severe and widespread contamination. According to a report by the International Atomic Energy Agency, the captivating blue glow of the radioactive cesium chloride was a major factor in the escalation of the disaster. The report notes that if the cesium hadn't emitted such a striking, almost supernatural light, fewer individuals might have been affected by the incident. After Ernesto Fabiano inadvertently opened the Pandora's box of cesium, the allure of the glowing powder led to its widespread distribution among the Ferreira family. Over the span of 5 days, tiny fragments of the powder, no larger than rice grains, were shared among several families. Ferreira's wife, Maria Gabriela, spread the shimmering blue dust over her pajamas and bed linens. When her mother noticed her vomiting and took some of the contamination home, the spread of the powder continued. Ferreira himself, having come into contact with the dust, went back to his job as a bus driver, where he interacted with many people. Ferreira's brother Evo also took some of the crystals home, where his 6-year-old daughter, Leide, became fascinated with the glittering substance. She smeared it on her arms and hands, admiring its sparkle while eating lunch. Tragically, she began to vomit shortly afterward. In the days following the opening of the cesium capsule, a significant number of people began to experience severe symptoms, including vomiting, diarrhea, and skin lesions. Local doctors initially attributed these symptoms to obscure tropical diseases or food poisoning. It wasn't until Maria Gabriela, convinced of the blue powder's role in the illness, traveled by bus with a junkyard employee to a nearby public health department that the true extent of the problem began to emerge. The employee carried the remaining cesium assembly and the blue powder in a bag, which later showed signs of intense radiation burns on his shoulder. On September 28th, Maria Gabriela, suffering from dizziness and vomiting for several days, entered the Vigilancia Sanitaria and placed a bag containing the remnants of the radiotherapy unit on a doctor's desk. This, she insisted, is what's harming my family. Initially dismissed by the doctor, Maria and the junkyard employee were redirected to a health center and later to a tropical diseases clinic, where several individuals who had come into contact with the glowing powder were being treated. Growing concern over the mysterious bag led the doctor to move it to a chair in the health center's courtyard. Concurrently, another doctor on site began to suspect that the numerous skin lesions being reported were not due to a tropical disease, but radiation exposure. This doctor contacted a colleague at the Tropical Diseases Center and discovered that he was not the first to report these unusual symptoms. A decision was made to have a visiting medical physicist assess the bag, but he wouldn't be available for at least a day. The next morning, equipped with a scintillometer borrowed from a local government agency, typically used for geological surveys, the physicist arrived at the Vigilancia Sanitaria. Upon turning on the meter, it immediately showed the highest possible radiation levels. Suspecting a malfunction, he returned to the government agency to get a replacement. 2 hours later, with a new scintillometer, the physicist found the readings still off the charts. At the same time, the doctor who had first seen Maria Gabriela contacted the fire department. The physicist urgently persuaded the firefighters to avoid handling the bag, as their initial plan was to dispose of it by throwing it into the nearest river. The rest of the day was a whirlwind of activity. Minutes later, police and fire brigades began evacuating everyone from the health center. An hour after that, doctors went to Ferreira's junkyard, where they also recorded dangerously high radiation levels. Ferreira and his family, though initially reluctant, were evacuated as well. Government agencies were promptly contacted, the Secretary for Health was alerted, and the National Nuclear Energy Commission was informed. By nightfall, the Secretary for Health designated the city's Olympic Stadium as a staging ground for potentially contaminated individuals, and the Tropical Diseases Hospital learned that their patients were exposed to radiation. Known contamination sites were reevaluated, and the Civil Defense Force was put on high alert. The Estadio Olimpico Pedro Ludovico, with a capacity of 45,000, became the center of operations starting September 6th. The National Nuclear Energy Commission monitored over 112,000 people there. Those most affected by the radiation were placed in tents, while many others from the city, having heard rumors, flocked to the stadium seeking reassurance. Despite the lack of a local response plan for such a large-scale radiological emergency, the authorities' improvised measures were effective in controlling the situation and preventing further serious exposure. Contaminated individuals were instructed to shower and bag their clothes, which reduced radiation readings by 50 to 75%. Monitoring equipment was set up to screen the large number of people lined up outside the stadium. Unfortunately, decontamination efforts were only partially successful. The most affected victims continued to sweat out the cesium-137 from their bodies. In the early hours of September 9th, authorities returned to the Vigilancia Sanitaria to contain the remaining cesium source originally brought in by Maria Gabriela. A small crane was used to lower a section of sewer pipe over the chair where the bag had been, and concrete was pumped in to seal the chair and the bag inside the pipe permanently. Radiation levels dropped significantly. Among those monitored for cesium exposure in Goiânia, many had absorbed the equivalent of an entire year's worth of normal background radiation in just a few days. Individuals were seriously contaminated either through external contact or internal exposure to the cesium dust, with many showing severe symptoms of radiation sickness that required immediate medical attention. These patients were transferred to hospitals across Brazil, but at Goiânia General Hospital, they went untreated for 2 days due to a lack of trained personnel to handle irradiated patients. The most severely affected had suffered serious skin injuries, including swelling, discoloration, blistering, and in some cases, complete loss of skin. Ernesto Fabiano, who had kept a small piece of cesium in his pocket as a ring for his wife, experienced severe muscle damage as the radiation penetrated deeply into his thigh. Bus driver Odisson Feijera, who had handled the cesium powder, lost most of the skin on his hand and eventually the tips of some fingers. The incident at Goiânia resulted in one of the most severe cases of cesium contamination in medical history, rivaling the disasters at Fukushima Daiichi and Chernobyl. Tragically, not all those affected would survive. The purpose of this documentary is not to sensationalize the trauma and injuries suffered by the people of Goiânia, but to highlight how the devastating potential of nuclear reactions can lead to disaster if not properly managed, respected, and communicated. This was starkly illustrated by the case of Leide Feijera, a 6-year-old who mistakenly thought she was playing with fairy dust. After Leide succumbed to acute radiation poisoning, her body was to be buried in Goiânia. News of her burial stirred a riot of nearly 1,000 people who feared that her body would poison the land. Protesters used stones and bricks to block the vehicle carrying her body, but she was eventually buried in a special fiberglass coffin lined with lead. The military had to intervene to prevent disturbances during the burial of Israel Baptista dos Santos, a scrapyard worker involved in dismantling the cesium capsule, and Admiralson Alves de Souza, who also died. Maria Gabriela, Leide's aunt and Feijera's wife, passed away on the same day as her niece. Within a month of exposure, the Goiânia incident had claimed 4 lives, contaminated an entire city, and resulted in significant economic damage, all from less cesium than would fit in half a tennis ball. If there is a silver lining to the Goiânia incident, it is that the situation was managed effectively by prompt and coordinated actions from both public and private sectors. Within 3 days of identifying the glowing blue powder as the source of contamination, all exposure sites were located and contained. By the following Saturday, efforts focused on treating patients and cleaning contaminated areas. A helicopter surveyed over 400 square kilometers, and detectors in vehicles checked more than 1,000 kilometers of roads. Contaminated houses were either cleaned with vacuums and pressure washers or demolished along with several city blocks. 3 buses, cars, and rolls of toilet paper were also found to be radioactive. In total, 3,500 cubic meters of waste, equivalent to 1.5 Olympic swimming pools of cesium-laced material, were sealed away. By Christmas, the main contamination sites had been addressed and cleanup efforts continued, with the goal of restoring normalcy in the following months. While dust can be buried and homes rebuilt, the residents of Goiânia endured the enduring effects of just a small amount of glowing powder for the rest of their lives. The Ferreira family suffered immense loss. Their homes were demolished, irradiated pets were euthanized, and their family histories were sealed in barrels of nuclear waste and buried. Devair Ferreira, the junkyard owner, died 7 years after his wife, Maria Gabriela, reportedly due to severe depression and years of heavy drinking. Wagner Ferreira, one of the original thieves of the orphan source, was left with lasting scars. Bus driver Odyssean Ferreira also bore lifelong injuries, losing parts of his fingers and skin from his hands. Beyond the physical damage, the incident had profound social repercussions. Odyssean faced ostracism from his community, with neighbors trying to block his family from moving into certain areas. Fearing for his future, he underwent a vasectomy to avoid having more children. In a 2012 interview with Beyond Nuclear International, Odyssean shared, "I still have pain in my hands, especially with temperature changes. Sometimes my hands get so hot that I have to put them in the freezer." Today, Odyssean serves as the president of the Association of Cesium Victims of Goiânia, which has over 1,600 members seeking ongoing compensation and medical care. In 2012, he was honored with a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Uranium Film Festival for his decades of advocacy. The original radiotherapy capsule, retrieved by the military in 1987, is now displayed at the School of Specialized Instruction in Rio de Janeiro and no longer poses a fatal threat. The Goiânia disaster, as noted by the International Atomic Energy Agency, illustrates how actions that might have been harmless under normal circumstances turned into life and death matters. If humans weren't so inclined to touch and share, and if cesium-137 wasn't so intensely radioactive, this disaster could have been avoided. Instead, the quest to harness nuclear power left deep scars on the people of Goiânia. After the cancer treatment clinic was abandoned, one of its owners attempted to recover some of the objects left behind, including the radiotherapy machine. A court-appointed police force stopped him due to disputes over the clinic's condition. This individual warned that they would be held responsible for what would happen with the cesium bomb, a statement made 4 months before the disaster. Records now reveal that the State Court of Goiás, Brazil, was aware of the radioactive material in the abandoned building for over a year, before 2 young men searching for scrap metal unintentionally triggered the worst radiological disaster in Latin America's history. Until next time, a huge thank you to the incredible team here at Untold Tales for their substantial support in creating this year's video. For those of you who may not be familiar with the Goiânia Incident, it's a real-life event that has inspired various media portrayals. If you're into horror, you might find similar themes in movies like The Chernobyl Diaries or The Toxic Avenger. These films, while fictional, delve into the chilling consequences of radioactive contamination. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for more Untold Tales.